Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Chris Hahn, and I'm with Community and Economic Development Associates, or CEDA, where I serve as the Economic Development Director for Fillmore County and several smaller communities throughout the area. The name of today's webinar is Farmers Getting Creative During Pandemic. We'll be having a conversation about the current state of agriculture during the global health crisis, learning about resources to offset any negative impacts, and talking about possible solutions for the future. This webinar is part of our Growing Stronger Together series. Growing Stronger Together is a partnership between the Houston County Economic Development Authority and the Harvest Entrepreneur Network, or HEN, program of Community Economic Development Associates. The webinars are sponsored by the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development, or DEED, and the Southern Minnesota Initiative Foundation, also known as SMIF, and Merchants Bank. For more information, please visit our website at HoustonCountyMN.com/agriculture. We're excited today to have Megan Roberts, an Extension Educator in Agricultural Business Management at the University of Minnesota, and Ryan Brixius, Rural Development Specialist with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. We have some questions that were predetermined, but the goal today is to get through those and to have 15 to 20 minutes at the end open for questions and answers from participants. So please write any questions that you have in the chat box to be asked at the end of the presentation questions. But first, at this time, I want to have our speakers introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about your organizations and the roles that you have there, and we can move on from there. Megan, would you like to go first?
Sure. Thank you so much, Chris. Thanks for inviting me, and I'm really glad to be with y'all here today. My name is Megan Roberts, and I am an Ag Business Management Extension Educator, as Chris mentioned, with the University of Minnesota Extension. I am located out of our Mankato regional office, but I have statewide responsibilities focusing on a variety of different topics. Pre-COVID-19, my two areas of specialty were farm transition and estate planning, and I also did some work with women in ag in general. Since COVID-19, a lot of my time has been spent looking at farm financial programs and risk management strategies for producers as they move through this pandemic. In addition to my role with University of Minnesota Extension, I do farm myself. My husband and I are co-owners with my in-laws in a multi-generational farrow-to-finish hog farm and corn and soybean farm near Medelia, Minnesota.
That's great. Thank you for that. Ryan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yep. Good afternoon. My name is Ryan Brixius. I'm with USDA Rural Development, and I am the Rural Business and Cooperative Service Specialist for Southeast Minnesota. Shorten that to area specialist, finance guy. So what I do is, and how that fits into the USDA's overall mission, is there's 38 different offices and agencies within USDA. Generally, you see Farm Service Agency, Natural Resources Conservation Service, and Agricultural Marketing Service working more in a direct role with the agricultural producers. However, there's a few things that I do at Rural Development that assist agricultural producers. They include value-add agriculture, energy efficient improvements, renewable energy systems, and with the new B&I CARES Act, Rural Development can extend working capital loans to ag producers directly. Also, it's my job is a little bit of the kind of big picture, what's going on with the overall rural economy, rather than focusing on individual issues. So some of the projects I financed are anything from maybe $20,000 to a small town's economic development authority, all the way up to, say, $200 billion or $200 million ethanol plant expansion, and everything in between.
Well, that's great. Thank you for that, both of you. One thing I do want to mention is that this presentation is being recorded and will be posted to the website for people to view at their leisure once the series or this meeting is complete. So, and again, thank you all for being here. I guess with that, I'd like to go ahead and ask our first question. And really, 2020 has been a crazy year. You know, COVID-19 has had an enormous impact on our business community. And I guess, what has the impact looked like for farmers and ag producers? I mean, I know it's, we're all businesses, but specifically with farmers and ag producers, what have you seen and what's been happening? What's that impact had? Either one of you can go first. You know what, Ryan, why don't you go first this time?
Yeah, so some of the most immediate things I've seen is with restaurant closures. A lot of the food processing facilities that were servicing these customers, they produced all this food and they couldn't sell it, it spoiled. So this has happened with food processors, breweries, I mean, you know, growers of all sizes. That entire market has dried up. So like we were talking about before the call, a lot of them are shifting towards, instead of going to the restaurants, now it's all direct to consumer sales or processing for consumer sales. And that market's really taken off. Some more things that I've seen, read about that have come out of the agricultural marketing service is with a lot of these meat processing facilities shutting down, they have way more animals, way more cattle, way more hogs, way more, you know, poultry than they could ever hope to sell or get to the processing facilities that are open. So they've had to, I mean, they've had to euthanize just millions of animals. So AMS, the USDA's Agricultural Marketing Service, they've stepped in, they've taken over purchases. There've also been some creative things. I mean, people buy directly from the farmer and then they take that animal to the butcher. However, the butcher shops are now just overloaded with everything. I mean, they're scheduled months in advance. So, you know, everyone's got product, very few people can actually sell it.
Yeah, I've seen that locally too with some of the butcher shops we work with in our area. I mean, they're out. This morning we talked to the one in my community and he's out till December. You know, and we're looking at, you know, if you want a half a cow, it's going to be December at this point, which is, you know, reflective of what you just said. Megan, what are your thoughts? What have you seen?
Well, in the role that I have with Extension, I'm working more with farmers that are at the very initial stages of food production. So a lot of raw agricultural commodity producers, corn, soybean, hogs, beef, etc. And if we look at those producers, coming into 2020, we were going on our 6th year of down agricultural prices. So COVID-19 for raw agricultural products was not the downturn out of the blue. It was the downturn after 6 years of downturn. And so that's why we're really seeing some end of the line decisions that are happening on some farms. Can they make it through COVID-19 when operating margins were already very, very low, when working capital had already been used up for years? Now, at the same time, there are those exceptions in the generalizations. There are some areas that are starting to rebound faster. Dairy is doing very well again. They had a 50% market price reduction because of those restaurant closures, because of those school closures, and that has already rebounded. We're not seeing that same thing with some of our other livestock animals. As Ryan just mentioned, we have a serious issue that is continuing to happen in the poultry and hog market right now. So COVID-19, like any business, farmers are facing some really serious repercussions, but it does vary across the industry depending on whether you direct to consumer, whether you are working more with you know, commodity production, and whether you have specialty products.
No, I appreciate that. And, you know, we see it too, as you talk about the ripple effect of these decisions. You know, the animals are, there's a surplus of animals, you know, for foods, but we can't get them processed. And then once you can get them processed, I don't know if anyone's tried to buy a freezer to put them in. You can't get a freezer. I mean, so it's a ripple effect across of multiple sections of our economy. So this next question.
This isn't. Oh.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to share that this isn't an area of extension that I work in, but one of our largest views ever on the University of Minnesota Extension website is how to butcher an animal at home. So we've moved past local butchering to folks trying to be able to do it in their own backyard. And there are some safe ways to do that if you follow the steps, but thousands and thousands and thousands of views of that page of how to butcher at home. So COVID-19 is continuing to show a lot of creativity, but also a lot of challenges for folks.
Well, it's interesting you said that because we've actually talked about, our area is very rural and there's a lot of hunting too. So we have a lot of people out there with skills maybe to butcher an animal. And if you're talking about young people with workforce development, that's a life skill. So we've actually had conversations about how do we work with some of these local meat processors and butcher shops. Is there an internship or apprenticeship opportunity there? So you're right, it offers solutions that maybe we haven't looked at before. So next question here is going to be really for Ryan. Ryan, how has the USDA responded to the impact of COVID-19? I mean, what types of programs are available now that may or may not have been available before or have more value, if you will, now?
Yeah. As far as program changes, so there's a lot more money in the programs. There's two types of federal funding, mandatory and then discretionary. So immediately the discretionary funds were bumped up. Then also with that CARES Act, a part of it, the Business and Industry Loan Guarantee Program, that's kind of our flagship program. An entirely new program to add on to that was enacted. And what it is for working capital. So it's take the 12 months of expenses, do a cash flow analysis. We can do a loan for up to that 12 months worth of expenses minus any SBA Paycheck Protection Program funds. And then we can do a loan without discounting. And it's a 90% guarantee rather than the 80% guarantee. And we're hoping that the lenders, they're going to come out and they're going to give more favorable terms, such as a longer term, a lower interest rate. That's going to offset a lot of their risk. So that's been the big one. I mean, some other small changes were enacted. When things first started, we had a lot of application deadlines, March 31st. Those were all extended 2 weeks to give people time to adjust. And then, of course, with rural development employees, we've all been teleworking for the past 3 months. Offices are still closed, restricted access, things like that. But I mean, day-to-day operations, we're still going. We have these programs. I'm looking for more to come out fiscal year 2021, which starts October 1st. So I'd expect to see more money, maybe longer application deadlines, and things of that nature.
That's great. Well, thank you.
From the USDA perspective, there's also, of course, the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, which is on the Farm Service Agency, so not rural development, but for many of the farmers that I traditionally work with, and also some that I don't traditionally work with and aren't traditionally served by Farm Service Agency, the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program does make $16.5 billion available to farmers in direct payments for coronavirus. And that includes some of those farm products that, again, aren't typically served by Farm Service Agency, including specialty crops, including livestock producers that would not typically be there. So I was just on a phone call with the administrator for CFAP, Coronavirus Food Assistance Program here in Minnesota, and they're really encouraging everyone to get the word out to particularly those farms that might not think they qualify to sign up for CFAP.
Oh, thank you. That's great. So this next question, Megan, we're going to ask you here if you could unpack the Family First CARES Act for us. There's a lot of programs that have come from the state and federal governments, and that's probably the one that sticks out, that probably most applicable here. Could you kind of walk us through how that program works?
Yeah, so, some of the things that Ryan just mentioned and what I just mentioned came out of those two first round and second round COVID federal acts. With Families First, the big thing for farmers to remember is that there are some mandatory sick leave and other protections in there, and farmers are not exempt from this. So if you have employees, it is important to follow those guidelines. The good thing about Families First is it does provide some ways for farmers to recoup the cost of providing this sick leave. And then with the CARES Act, the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program was one of the largest programs that was specific to ag. But then we had the general small business program that some farmers were able to apply for the first time. So economic injury disaster loans are something that folks that are used to working with small business administration probably had heard of previously. Farmers had been exempt from that program, and as legislation moved through Congress, there was a particular statute in the coronavirus legislation that made farmers finally eligible for that program. So there is funding available through Small Business Administration still for economic injury disaster loans and for economic injury disaster loan advances, which don't have to be paid back. And then the other big one in CARES would be Paycheck Protection Program. It looks like that might be extended, but of course, as it stands right now, it did expire last night on June 30th. And until everything gets signed by the president and both houses approve it, we can't speculate too much on whether that will be approved. But those were some of the big federal programs that here in Extension we've been trying to remind people of. Just to review, that farmers do have to abide by the Families First protections, that the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program through Farm Service Agency and the United States Department of Ag is kind of the flagship. And then you've got those two major Small Business Administration programs, Paycheck Protection Program and the Economic Injury Disaster Loans, or EIDLs.
All right, that's great. Thanks for going through all that. I know it's a lot of big names of programs that have a lot of crazy acronyms that people get used to. So we appreciate you walking.
Alphabet soup.
So Ryan, I'll let you go first on this one. From a business management perspective, what should our farm families be thinking about right now that may be different or more important now than ever versus what we've normally done? What are probably the priorities, or what do you think they should be looking at right now?
I think a market for their product is going to be the big issue. I mean, are they going to be profitable when they do actually, when it does come time to harvest and then sell? There's not much that a farm family can do on that aspect. If you produce a commodity, you're really a price taker, not a price maker. Some proactive things that a farm family can do is they can look at the value add side of things. If they are just producing and a commodity, okay, you get what you get. But if you can find any type of way to add value, specialty crop, anything like that, you have another outlet for it. To give you an example, best example I can think of, a farm family that I've worked with personally is Metz's Heartland Creamery out in Rushford. So this is a farm family that had a herd of about 500 some odd dairy cows. That's not a very big herd. You're not going to be profitable doing that. So he made the decision, it's all right, you either ramp up to 1,500, maybe 2,000 cows, or you have to diversify your business. And he decided to start the creamery. And he got to a point where after dairy prices crashed, the creamery was helping to support the dairy farm operation. So whereas a lot of other dairy farmers went out of business, he's still in operation. He's taking his own milk, he's making cheese curds out of it, and he's looking at other product lines. And, you know, it's kind of one of those things where you have to think long term. I don't believe that COVID-19 has changed any of these overall trends. I think it's just accelerated them to where you have to look at, you know, diversifying the business, different sources of cash flow. And, you know, it's never going to be easy because it does take a lot more creativity. You can't be doing the same things that you have been doing decade after decade. But I mean, I think that's what a farm family has to focus on. It's okay, can you make this work? The numbers don't add up. You have to make a change. You have to make a plan to make the change. So.
I agree. Megan, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I've been thinking about how I wanted to answer this question. And actually something in a meeting that I had earlier today kind of popped into my head. And this might seem like a really simple thing, but I think we can't emphasize it enough. I mean, focusing on your records is so essential because you don't truly know what is an area to expand into, to diversify into, if you don't know on an enterprise by enterprise basis what your bottom line looks like. The meeting that I was in was on coronavirus food assistance program, and one of the comments was that some farmers did not have the accurate enough records to even apply for this program. That is a direct payment with no need to pay it back. It's not a loan, it is a direct payment. And something as simple as records was preventing some farmers from being able to apply. So that's not a COVID-19 related issue. That's an overall farm management issue. I think anytime we can really hone in on our finances, understand our strengths, understand our weaknesses, and then move towards those strengths, that's going to set you up for better long-term success.
Great. So this next question, and I'm going to let Megan go first on this one, is because Ryan gave a great example with Matt's Creamery. But what creative examples have you seen from farmers on small scale producers in response to COVID-19? I mean, I know it's a challenge to be nimble and redesign or maybe tweak your processes, but what have you seen out there with the farmers you're working with that's been successful?
Yeah, I've heard some really innovative strategies of trying to shift into that direct to consumer, to find ways to continue to connect with consumers, even with the social distancing requirements, with some of those markets being gone. Of course, not every farm is going to fall into those categories. Not every farm is producing a product that lends itself to direct to consumer. On our farm, we produce grain, corn, and soybeans. We are really set into a market where we have to sell to certain types of end users, and that is not a consumer. It is an ethanol plant. It is a farmer's co-op. It is a feed mill. This doesn't work for every farm, but some of the most creative and interesting approaches I have seen has been related to some of those direct to consumer, using Facebook, using Instagram, using word of mouth, cell phone, text messages, things like that, in order to continue to sell their product and deliver in a way that's safe during COVID-19.
Great, thank you. Ryan, do you have another one?
Two more actually, Megan, since you mentioned the row crop corn farming. So in Spring Grove, down by your way, Chris. So there's a farmer, Christian Myra. What we financed for him was his distillery. Mm-hmm. So organic corn farmer. said, all right, I don't have the land to, run up to 1,000 acres, don't want to make the capital investment. I'll just produce highly specialized corn, brew it, distill it, make whiskey. And that's how Rock Filter Distillery got going. Another example out in Tremont Milling, is he started taking his corn and then making tortilla chips out of it. So, there's things that it's not always what you think. And I suppose aside to that, USDA does have some things where, yeah, they're helping out the renewable fuel. I recently just closed out a grant to the Minnesota Soybean Growers Association. What they're doing is, because of biofuel, right now it's pretty tough to make biodiesel out of soybean oil economically, because once you get the oil, you have to burn a massive amount of natural gas to heat it before you can process it. Well, there was one, I believe it was a University of Minnesota scientist in Waseca that does plasma reactors. So rather than heating the soybean oil, then processing it, it can go in at room temperature through this reactor, and rural development help finance it. And ultimately it might just be a drop in the bucket, maybe an extra 20 cents per bushel on soybeans, but that's a whole new market that's expanding. I mean, if they can get this to where it's very competitive against petroleum-based diesel, it helps the farmers in a couple of ways, because now their costs of input are down and the value of their product on the output is up. So. And I've heard from my counterparts over at the Natural Resources Conservation Service, there are newer ways to till the fields, or no-till, where farmers can have fewer inputs and also get more output as well. An example, there was the last person who was at NRCS in the Faribault office, Tom Kaufman. He told me that he worked part-time for these two brothers. Each of them had a soybean operation. One of them, no-till. The other one, just plowed, tilled, did all that, the traditional farming. So the no-till guy had fewer inputs because he's not plowing his field. Also, he had a higher yield. And what it worked out to was an additional $90 per acre as far as his profit margin. So, I mean, there are ways that farmers, and again, they're going to have to change. I mean, going from till to no-till, keeping better records, maybe looking at other products. There are opportunities out there, but it's not going to be the traditional things that have been done generation after generation.
No, I think those are great examples. And it's exciting. I mean, it's easy to look at everything that's happening and saying, wow, this is really unfortunate. But I think a lot of these innovations, are kind of being forced to the front. And, if it's $90 an acre or whatever it is, the fact that we're innovating these processes to move forward, I think is really exciting. So the next question, and Ryan, if you want to stay on and take this one first, that's fine. What do you think the future of farming looks like in the context of COVID-19? I think we kind of led into this a little bit with the last question, but is there something positive at the end of the road, or what is that positive thing? I mean, I personally see it as innovation, although we may not know what the fruits of that will be long term. But what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's the same thing. It's COVID-19 is not going to interrupt any of the trends. It's going to accelerate them. So it's going to be, the big producers are going to get even bigger. The smaller producers, and they're not going to get smaller, but they're going to definitely carve out their niche as far as local foods. And that's really what's going to happen. As far as the innovation, the data that they're collecting, the soil science behind it, you're going to get to a point where, especially with, faster internet connections, you can put one transmitter in the middle of a field that's going to drive that tractor. It's going to do precision planting down to the nearest millimeter of where that seed is going to go below the soil to get the highest yield. You're going to have precise irrigation, fertilizer, all of that. Everything's going to be perfectly drain tiled to where you'll always have the perfect amount of moisture in the soil. they're going to optimize. I mean, even from, growing up in southern Minnesota, in Faribault County, that's where I'm from originally, some of the yields per acre on corn are, I mean, they're half of what they are right now. And I mean, what technology is behind that? It's just better equipment.
And genetics, lots of genetic improvements. Seed production has definitely increased, and I think that has been one of the big things. But that is not the root of this question. The question is in the context of COVID-19, and I think that as Ryan was talking, my answer for this one changed a little bit, and I think I have to go back to focusing on something that's pretty tangible. I think that broadband connectivity is maybe a bit of the light of COVID-19 in rural areas of the United States. I have never seen such a focus on broadband connectivity and such an awareness of how poor it really is out in some areas of rural Minnesota. I mean, I am unable to connect to you guys using my internet connection right now. I have to be utilizing a cell connection. And you can probably see that I am, even though I'm not using audio from my internet, I'm still freezing up on my video. And I live in an area that is good broadband connectivity for rural Minnesota. I was just looking at the FCC rates. They do a study that tries to, as best they can, estimate what different counties across the United States have for broadband connectivity. And my county was doing okay for a rural area. I still can't be able to always get internet to work in my tractor to do the things that Ryan was just mentioning. You can't measure some of those innovative, technologically heavy strategies if you can't get internet in your combine, in your tractor, in your barn. So this was not originally how I thought I would answer this question, but it's something that's happening very immediately. And if farmers do not have access to broadband, it's that same disconnect that was back in the rural electrification era. There was the disconnect between towns and farmers. And farmers needed electricity just the same way we need rural broadband today.
Well, that's a great point. We've definitely seen the focus on that too in our economic development communities. So with that, that's really the last question that we had laid out. Is there anything either of you would like to add? Just maybe based on what you're seeing or something we didn't talk about that you feel is important? Is there anything else that you want to mention?
I would just say there's also some great programs on the Minnesota level. You mentioned DEED as a sponsor of this, and right now they have their $10,000 small business grant. So if you are a farm, you qualify for that in the same way other small businesses do. There are other programs that are out of DEED. There are other programs that are out of the Minnesota Department of Ag. So while there are many national approaches to financial relief and being creative during COVID-19, the state of Minnesota is also doing a good job, and it's a great place to look for programs on their websites as well.
Yeah, and I suppose to piggyback on what Megan just said, so there's a number of state Minnesota Department of Agricultural programs that I can tell they dovetail right into what the USDA offers. For example, if there's a loan program to where USDA would only do, say, 80% of it. There's one I remember years ago hearing about where the state of Minnesota Department of Ag would do another 10%. So the farmer would only have to, say, come in with 10% equity.
Okay.
And then the value added producer grant program, the one at rural development, we only cover working capital. But the Minnesota Department of Agriculture one, that covers equipment and real estate improvements. So you get one, you can get the other, and you have a full-on value-add business that you have all the financing for the first 3 years.
No, that's great. We did have a question in the chat here, and do either of you have resources and starting points or contacts for people to reach out to as it relates to keeping records and kind of helping organize their business, you know, sales tracking, generating leads, those types of things? And I've seen this with some of the farmers I work with too, is that the metrics, to your point earlier, Ryan, and getting that data and having that in running your business is so important. Are there some good resources or starting points either of you would recommend that people could reach out to or look into for that, whether they be business templates or e-courses or something like that?
There's a few resources I know of. Just QuickBooks is huge, keeping really good records there. Mm-hmm. And out of all the small I'd say the micro enterprises I've worked with, there's a lot of opportunity to use that to keep records that they're just not using. Mm-hmm. The small business development centers, one in Mankato, one in Rochester, they typically have some sort of class where any small business owner can take it to learn how to use that program. I'm not sure if there's anything that's software that's specific for farmers, but I'm sure there's something on the marketplace. It's just a matter of, you know, buying it, taking the time to learn how to use it. And then the other point with contacts and sales, there's a number of resources for marketing. Say small agricultural enterprise, Minnesota Grown. That's a directory that lists hundreds of different, you know, direct-to-consumer farms, you know, producers. Also, I've worked with the Feast Local Foods Network, and we have a program. We put on a trade show once a year and a festival at the Rochester Mayo Civic Center, to where they can actually sign up and they can meet, you know, the 1,000 or so people that come through.
That's great. Those are great resources.
I'd just like to maybe piggyback on that. Record keeping is a strong area of focus for Extension, the team that I work on. We work a lot with the Minnesota State College and University System Farm Business Management Program. Now that is a tuition-based program, so it's a bigger commitment, but for individuals that are just starting out in farming or really know that they need that extra help to get their record keeping up to snuff, farm business management is definitely something that we in Extension recommend. There is a Minnesota Department of Agriculture scholarship to help reduce the cost of it, so it can be relatively cost-friendly to enroll in farm business management. And then there are a number of requirements if you are using any of the Minnesota Department of Agriculture loan programs or Farm Service Agency loan programs. They require farm business management as a part of it. So that is one thing, but we know that not everyone is going to go for the full farm business management experience. So we do have some resources on our website on basic record keeping, and then also how those records lead into an income statement, a cash flow, a statement of owner's equity, etc. We find that QuickBooks, like Ryan mentioned, is a great program. Not everyone is ready to make that commitment to QuickBooks. Sometimes just starting out with Excel is a great place to begin. I don't think we have it on our Extension website yet, but I have worked with a colleague to create an Excel template that is tailored for an agricultural producer. And then to Ryan's point about the software programs specific to agriculture, there are quite a few ag-specific programs. They function very similarly to QuickBooks, but they are pre-populated with a lot of the different accounts and expense categories that are going to directly feed into the farmer's tax form, the Schedule F, in a way that QuickBooks isn't going to be pre-populated with seed or with fertilizer, because a normal small business probably won't have that. but just about every farm is going to have, you know, some of those inputs. And so one of the programs that we really like is PC Mars. That would be a great program that is farm specific and kind of one of those entry-level record keeping programs. Of course, though, as Extension, I am not recommending any specific program.
No, that's all great information. And I mean, the more resources we have to start looking into is, you know, is really where it starts. So we will also send out contact information in a post presentation email to everybody as well. Any other questions from the audience at this point? I think we're doing pretty good on time. If you want to just unmute, you can certainly ask it. Anybody?
We have a question here in the chat box that I'll read. It's from Courtney. She says, thank you for the great tips on record keeping. One other question. While this is not specific to COVID, I'm working with an individual who's looking to buy a small farm right now and start a small farming operation, specifically beef cattle. They're looking for resources for startup. Are there any good resources I should point them towards?
Yeah, definitely their county's FSA office. There is one program I heard, I believe the maximum loan limit is something about 1.1 million. And then also with livestock, the state of Minnesota Department of Agriculture does have another program to help with financing for the purchase of livestock.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I was going to say a farm service agency is always one of those places that you can start with whenever looking for beginning farmer funding. They are very overrun right now with the coronavirus food assistance program and acreage reports being due. But I think in the next couple of weeks, they're going to get through that overrun of folks, and then will be a little less overworked. Minnesota Department of Ag's Rural Finance Authority is a great place for funding. Then also with the Minnesota Department of Ag, one of the big issues is if you're starting a new farm, where do you purchase that farm? Are you able to connect with maybe a retiring farm? And I don't know the specifics of this question, but if it's just trying to find and make those connections, the Minnesota Department of Agriculture has their Farm Link program. And then some non-governmental agencies have various programs trying to connect farmers that are retiring and don't have their own family heirs with farmers that are looking to start and don't have those connections. So some of them are renewing the countryside, land stewardship program. Again, these aren't governmental programs, but they do have some of the connections and networking that can be difficult to find without linking into an organization.
Great, thank you for that. Any other questions from our audience?
Yeah, I have a question. I am very aware that, you know, this is a global health crisis, and we've talked a lot about the impact on farmers in the US. And so I guess this question is going to be specific to more row crop agriculture, but I'm interested in your reflections on how it's going to impact global markets and what that impact is going to look like in the US, because certainly, you know, we export a lot of grain to places like China for feed. We're in competitions with places like Brazil for corn production, and they're feeling this impact just as much. So I'm just interested in what your reflections are on what this is going to look like from a global perspective.
In my opinion, I think it is early days yet in the grand scheme of this, and it's difficult to know at this point. While South America, for example, is really in the depths of their first wave of COVID, it doesn't look like their corn and soybean production is going to be dramatically off. If it was, we would see futures markets for row crops to be better than they are right now. We also have the fact that a lot of row crops like corn and beans do go into fuel in addition to going into feed. And there is a dramatically reduced need for fuel right now. So I was just looking at crop prices. Things are still rough today. We did see a little surge in markets, which was a nice ray of sunshine yesterday, but that was more related to United States estimates being off, not global estimates. Ryan, do you have different perspectives as a USDA person on some of these global issues?
Not really, because most of my focus is just on the rural economy of Minnesota. So when you start talking about the commodities markets worldwide, I mean, I couldn't even tell you the last time I looked up the price of corn or soybeans. I do know some of it as far as, you know, between corn, soybeans, a certain amount is animal feed, a certain amount is fuel, a small amount is actually consumed by humans. I do know there's competition around the world. I mean, yes, South America, they have the advantage, their growing season is opposite ours. But I see a lot of overproduction in corn, soybeans, especially since one of the things I read on Bloomberg.net, it was a number of years ago, but Southern Russia, their climate and soil is comparable to what we see here in the Midwest. And they're not even close to ramping up their production. I mean, they're just now getting out of that whole Soviet Union hangover to where they're starting to produce at mass scale. When they ramp up, well, they're going to basically sell the most to China. But right now, they're still in the infancy. I mean, they're not even close, but that is a future competitor for the American Midwest farmer. And as far as, you know, specific to COVID-19, I look at this as more of a short-term, I hope it's a short-term thing. So I don't know if it's going to have that long-term lasting impact. And I know with economic trends, you don't really see it when you're in it. It's only after the fact that you can look back and see what actually happened. So it may be a year or two before we can check charts and say, yep, that's COVID-19 right there. That's the impact.
Right now, one of the difficult things is understanding what is a COVID-19 repercussion for commodity, raw agricultural commodity crops, and what is a trade war repercussion for raw agricultural commodity crops. And we can start to see some of that, but it isn't crystal clear yet.
All right, well, unless there's any other questions, I guess at this time we're coming up on our time limit here. I just want to say thank you again to Ryan and Megan for taking some time today to share your ideas and your knowledge with us. And this has been some great information. And we really appreciate you spending the time with us today. Again, I want to remind everybody this presentation has been recorded or will be posted. And make sure to check out the Growing Stronger Together series. And for that, you can find the information on the Houston County Economic Development website. That is HoustonCountyMN.com/agriculture. There are some other presentations in that series that we're excited to share with everybody coming up in the next weeks and months. So be sure to check that out. And with that, again, I just want to say thanks to everybody for attending, and thank you to our presenters and to our the teammates on here from CETA as well. And I guess with that, unless anyone has any final comments, that's what I really have today. So thank you so much, everybody, and we really appreciate it.